Okay guys, welcome to the advanced resistance training coaching. So it was more based around your ability to coach different techniques for resistance training. So in this tube we used to get you to look at sort of at least 10 people's movement patterning and different body shapes for squat, deadlift and bench. And then if we had time we'd do like different exercises and look at the different ways that you can coach it and how people move differently. So Graham and I have spent the morning just doing incorrect techniques and trying to change it up for you. So hopefully you still get some of the same experience, but I think the take home is be aware that there are no sort of set rules for technique. You have to adjust it for each human so it suits their body shape. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Graham?
Yeah, not everyone is going to get the same stimulus from the same movement. Not everyone needs to back squat. Maybe some people need a front squat, some people need a hinge. Like, everyone is very individual.
Yeah, so I changed my cueing for pretty much every athlete, every person I train, and sometimes you have to try multiple different cues to get it, psychologically for them to figure it out, but then also just, sometimes you coach the squat to push the hips back, sometimes I coach it to drive the knees forward, and you'll see the difference of that for me because that's a huge technique change in me.
Yeah. And sometimes people are just going to look gumpy, no matter what you do, and as long as you are keeping a neutral spine, keeping the knees out, protecting all those main cues, it doesn't need to be overcoached. People will look goofy sometimes, and it doesn't matter. And
often if it's general public and even probably and more athlete stuff, they don't go home and practice it. So you're starting from scratch every single time. And it can be years and years and years before they figure it out. So, all right, let's move on. So we have lots of different little mini videos we're going to be dropping in on this one. So this isn't necessarily advanced coaching, but etiquette, I think, we sort of touched on it at EPP 1 and I mentioned it, but there's no specific slides on it. But we talk a lot about it in this little video that we'll put at the end. But it's very, very important to have these things in the back of your head when you're coaching athletes, general public, exercise physiology, clinical. It applies for everything. So you have to think about where you're standing and whether it's appropriate. The language you use. So I think quite often coaches and exercise physiologists might get a little bit too matey in their communication styles. Your scope of practice, this is a huge one. Where's your scope of practice on nutrition? Where's your scope of practice on diagnosis? So you see a lot of postural diagnosis, which is very much in the realm of physiotherapy. What else do we see?
Overcomplication.
Overcomplication. There's heaps of stuff that people go way beyond their scope of practice.
Yeah, a lot of the time the words you learn in anatomy, your client does not know, and you're not going to impress them. You're just going to confuse them and make it harder for you to coach later.
Yeah.
Just layman's terms, keep it super simple. Lean over more, shoulders back, hips back, shoulders forward, not forward trunk lean, control knee valgus. That's a conversation I'll have with Dave, but not with my client, because that would be doing more damage than good.
Yeah. And you've got to be very careful on, and I think I've alluded to this in other chats, if I tell Graham he has like a problem and I sort of diagnose it, you can create a whole psychosocial issue that wasn't really there because you weren't qualified to make it. People, if they think they've got a damaged back, that the implications of that is huge on their rehabilitation process. And you'll go into this in Musk with Dan a lot.
And as a coach or a trainer, you're in a position of power where what you say can have influence, and if you say the wrong thing or say something negative or kind of plant that seed of doubt because of your position of power or influence, it can create some more longer term issues.
And be very aware that you guys are doing the tertiary level courses, but your clients and general public really don't understand the difference in your education versus a PT who's done a 12-week course. So, and it's very hard to sort of portray that to your client and make them understand that you're actually much more educated than these people, and they'll take the advice of a person who's done an online 12-week course as gospel as much as they'll take yours. So Moving on, clothing. Remember, you are trying to create a professional relationship with this person. So be very aware of the clothing that you wear. Last year in the practical exam, and this is for you as a student as well, in the practical exam we had some students showing up in very, very skimpy clothing. These days it's very common and accepted to be wearing that stuff in everyday life, but you've got to be aware that when you're demonstrating some of these exercises, they are awkward, have some sort of positions that could get people thinking different things.
Yeah.
Like something like a hip thrust if you're wearing really, really tight clothing. And this is guys and girls, because I'm seeing guys now wear skins with no shorts in the gym as well.
Yeah.
You've got very little to hide.
It's all out there.
It's all out there, and some of the movements can, look, like a hip hinge type movements, could be taken in some connotations.
Yeah. You should be dressing the way you train the same as when you're a coach.
Yeah.
You should look like a coach, not like a trainer.
Yeah. So just be aware of how seriously people will take you. Your first impression and your image is very important, and as much as it shouldn't matter, it does. So be very aware of the clothing that you're wearing. And the last thing we're going to talk about there is evidence-based practice. So try, as to your best ability, be up to date with the evidence, so the research basis. And you guys learn more and more about how we find that and how we apply that through your degree. So stick to that rather than listening to some guru on the internet or influencer on the internet and then just passing that on. Make sure you go check PubMed. I generally will just go and read the most up-to-date literature review or meta-analysis, and that will tell you where the literature's at. Is that sort of what you do?
Yeah. I wouldn't prescribe an exercise that I couldn't explain why I would give it. I wouldn't prescribe an exercise that I wouldn't do myself.
Yeah.
If you ask me why and I can't justify why I'm making you do it, I shouldn't be making you do it.
Yeah, that's very important. And somebody told me that early in my career, that you should be able to explain every single exercise and why you've done it.
You'll get asked why.
Yeah.
By every second client, easy. Why are we doing this? What's the benefit? How is this going to help my sport? How's this going to help me lose weight? Anything.
And probably more than ever now, you have to justify what you're doing, because they can go and jump on Instagram, Facebook or YouTube, and you'll find 10 people who have a reasonably large following with opinions and ideas that are on the opposite side of the evidence-based practice spectrum.
Yeah. And then bigger picture with your coaching style and getting buy-in and intent from your client or athlete. If you're someone that's asked why we're doing this and you say, I don't know, or I saw it from this guy, your client's going to go, you're an idiot, or why didn't I just go to that guy then, if you're going to kind of regurgitate what he says. And then on the other side, if you go, we're doing it because I said we do it, that's not getting real buy-in from your client. Are they going to give you what you want? Are they going to perform and give intent the way that you want just because you say, that's what I want?
Yeah. Okay guys, sorry, we got interrupted by some maintenance guys there. So we'll go over evidence-based practice again. Sorry if we repeat anything, but where I think I was going to say to be very careful with following this influencer sort of guru style thing that's really emerging these days. Mainly because I've been doing this since 2005 and I've seen the rise and fall of each of these trends multiple times. So nothing is new. We were learning, functional movement screening, balance balls. We were doing squats on balance balls back then because it was super popular. Full range of movement exercises was huge. You had to do ass to grass, and then it shifted back the other way and it's coming back again. So nothing's new. And from years and years of experience in coaching for me, essentially you can't give a one size fits all for anybody in exercise programming. So some people you'll train that have really, really high range of movement. You will sometimes say, for example, people with heaps of dorsiflexion, quite often they don't use their glutes well. So you have to coach them to sit back in exercises to use their glutes more. Whereas somebody like me who's a little bit restricted, and you'll see this in one of our videos, I coach to drive my knees forward, and that fixes the squat. So I'm always changing cues, and there's no one size fits all that's the best for anyone. So these people who come out and say it has to be done this way, if anyone says it has to be done this way, I take them as very low skilled coaches. And you know, people have these sort of like, you know, animal crawls are the only way to do stuff. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to improve? Like when we were talking about last week, animal crawls are very much building sort of the anaerobic system. So, you know, they're very hard for about 30 seconds to a minute. So we're just developing that system, but we're not producing any extra power in, like, say, triple extension for someone who needs to jump high and use that stretch shorten cycle. So it comes to, like, you know, that's not the best for a basketball athlete. And the basketball athlete's 6'6" to 7 foot, so it might not suit them either.
Yeah.
You got anything you want to throw in there?
I definitely agree with that. One thing I try and think of is that people buy in, or people should buy into, principles and not systems. So a system of someone saying, juggling is how we turn the brain on. These movements are how we do this and that. Juggling is a great skill for creating a novel stimulus and turning on the brain and nervous system response. Is that going to work on a circus performer who's juggled since they were 2 years old? Are they going to get much stimulus from juggling? No. Is the principle of, hey, let's use a novel stimulus, whether it's juggling, teaching them a dance, making them catch a ball, making them do something with their eyes closed? Yes. So beware of people who have systems and say, this is the way, this is the only way, as opposed to people who have a level of understanding where they can give you the tool you need to fill that void and work towards that principle.
Yeah. And so we push this tute into, I think it's the advanced coaching stuff you'll do with Mark later on, but we were talking about in one of our tutes last year, the motor control, like, you know, so sort of like reflexes and stuff like that. If I do a generalized agility drill or reflex drill, it doesn't necessarily transfer into other skills. You just get good at the skill that you practice.
Yeah.
So all that happens if I do something, and I'm saying juggling because it's very popular at the moment with one of the movements, all that does is get me better at juggling. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a be all end all for you know, cricket athletes or something like that, because the brain learns by looking for signals. So when somebody's doing a cricket bowl, your brain will be learning to react to the shoulder movement before they let go. So generalized reaction drills won't necessarily transfer into that. So what are we using the generalized drills for at the start of a session? Wake them up. So if we do the same drill all the time, it's not as challenging, like Graham was alluding to, so it's not going to wake us up as much. So doing novel stuff to wake us up, which means you have to change it regularly, is what's going to make us neurally aware and, you know, switch the cognition on. If you're trying to get better at something like juggling, just do that. If that's fine if that's what you're going to do, but call it what it is. And so a lot of this guru stuff sort of goes to this, like, this is what you have to do. Everyone should be juggling. It's like, well, it only makes you better at juggling. You know, it will switch you on for the first few months. And there's a couple of other things we taught about that. So like generalized agility stuff, and you're going to go do this probably with Mark. If we just go out and do agility training, it won't necessarily make you more agile in the field because you have to read where the players are coming from to change direction correctly. So we can use it to improve technique, but we need to make it an open scenario, very specific to the sport, to actually improve that skill. So that sort of generalized agility advice or skills advice is pretty poor, really.
Yeah.
So let's move on. So we've got a video for this as well, spotting. Spotting can be, even between professionals, a little bit controversial of how you should do it. Main thing that I always sort of allude to for you guys is body position, is it appropriate? And safety for yourself. And some of these body positions, you can't help it but to be a little bit awkward. But if somebody's asking you to spot them, you know, they're going to have to accept that. So just be aware of where you position yourself and how safe you are, because you can increase the leverage and it puts a lot on your spine. You're very much at risk, probably more than the person you're spotting quite often. And try and avoid doing it if you can. So teach them to drop the bar correctly, set up the levers. But we talk about that in the videos. You want to throw anything in there?
No.
Yeah. Okay guys, we're just going to talk a little bit of etiquette for personal training. well, any sort of training, coaching, I always say personal training because that's where I've been in most of my career. There's definitely some etiquette things that may seem like common sense to a lot of you, but Graham and I have both seen new trainers or coaches that sort of break these rules and they don't even really sort of realise that it can be a bit awkward. So just be very aware of your standing position when you're spotting and coaching, and I'd say especially when you're working with someone of the opposite gender. You know, always have in the back of your head, but you definitely need to create a relationship with your client or athlete or whoever you're working with before you're going to touch them when you're trying to show them cues and fix their technique and where you stand, because a lot of people won't be real comfortable with that real close quarter stuff, and in this sort of industry you get really used to that and forget how people feel when they're a little bit awkward about that. So the first, we'll show you a range of exercises and where what positions are, but then you guys, it'll become intuitive and you guys will be able to sort of pick your position. So one of the main ones we see is, you'll be too close front on. So real close front on, even if we're just both standing, so stand up, Graham. Even here sometimes can be a bit weird, even if I talk to someone here. So just standing back in this sort of slight angle is much less sort of imposing. But then you'll see, especially new coaches, they'll be standing right here with them watching. So they're trying to be diligent and watch, but this is very awkward if that Graham's in doing a deadlift now. So Graham does just maybe 1 or 2 reps for you. So I'm standing like here, it's super awkward. The other one that happens is they'll get too close to the actual bar or movement, so I might be here. So I'm actually in Graham's way. So just be wary of your position. Also be wary of health and safety a lot of the time. So many people get injured. So I would suggest usually, 1.5 meters here on a slight angle, and then what I do is sort of rotate my view as Graham's going. So if he does sort of 2 or 3 reps here, and then we're just going through. And you can see different angles, and you can pick up different stuff. So in the front angle, I can see his knees. The side arm, I can see the actual movements of his hips. Then when you're coming in for cueing, generally I'll ask my client once and say, generally, when I coach, sometimes I'll need to touch your, different parts of your body to help cue the movement, because it's generally that kinesthetic pressure that helps them figure out their movement really quickly. But the main thing with that is don't be sort of tentative and awkward. If you're going to do it, be confident in what you're doing. So things like if Graham trying to fix up his, say his hip hinge, we might use the dowel. If you come in and you're sort of a bit weird about it, it gets a bit weird, but just come in, pop in, you need to get all 3 points down, so get your head in, chin tucked, and then just pushing your bum back or your hips back, and then maintaining those 3 points of contact. And then, so that's fine to do there. Other things I'll do is I'll come in and say they're doing a row activity, I might be squeeze my fingers with your shoulder blades, so that's teaching them retraction of the scalps and things like that. So if you're more confident, it becomes less awkward. You don't have to ask the client every single time. Make sure you create that relationship. Hey, do you mind when I'm coaching you if I give you little pointers or kinesthetic pointers? Anything else there, Graham, you need to talk about?
I try and give cues from the front. So if Dave's performing an exercise, I don't want to be behind him talking into his ear because it can be a little too erotic.
Yeah.
And I try to, if I'm going to give a tactile cue, I'll usually announce it,
Yeah.
especially with a new client. So if I would say to Dave, I'm just going to squeeze back here, I want you to focus on this sensation here.
Yeah.
If people can be a little bit taken aback or shocked if he's not expecting it and I'm now grabbing him, especially if that's someone I don't have the relationship with.
Yeah.
That, and don't stand in front of people when they're lifting, it's very distracting.
Yeah. Graham just remind me one there. If anyone's doing any hip hinge work, deadlift, don't ever stand directly behind the meter, because that's very awkward. Even if you're like 2 meters behind and maybe there's a mirror, that can be very awkward too. So just always a little bit side on, even front and back.
There's nothing you're going to see here that you're not going to see back here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one we'll mention quickly is try and be on the same level. So if Graham's working on the ground, it can be a little weird, even if I've got a distance and I'm just sort of standing over him. like this. It's definitely weird if I'm standing here. So I'll come down, half kneeling sort of position, and I'm still, you're a little closer than standing, maybe half a metre, but there I can see everything and we can communicate, and my client knows where I am, what I'm looking at, what I'm doing. So just sort of common sense, but if you've never thought about it, sometimes you just find yourself in weird positions. Okay, so the next thing we should discuss is sort of spotting etiquette. There's a lot of debate, and I've done courses where they've said opposite to what I think, so I'm not going to tell you right or wrong, mainly sort of so you can get some conceptual ideas and the things that you should be thinking about, because spotting can be very up close and personal, so you usually want a bit of a relationship first. But once you get into it, the main thing that you should be thinking about is whether this person will need assistance out of it, or you're just there as a presence so that they feel comfortable and confident. And there's no anxiety about it because they know that there's someone there. If they're, think about their level. So if I was spotting Graham and he lifts pretty heavy, we may need 2 spotters at each side, and I'll show you an example of how you do that. But let's start with just a basic squat and some different techniques. The other thing you've got to think about is whether you actually need the squat as well. So if I've got a platform, or I could just teach Graham how to dump the bar, so you just drop it backwards so it's out of the way. We can set up squat safety bars, so always go with that option that protects you first, because at any time when I'm I'm spotting, the leverage is sort of against me, and it actually puts me in a bit of risk. So I know in the etiquette discussion we talked about not being directly behind people and not too close, but once you sort of reach this range of lifting, quite often people, your lifter will be quite happy with it because they know what you're doing. So I'll be up behind Graham here, and generally they'll ask for a spot so that he's ready for what's going to happen. There's a couple of different thinking. I'll show you the overbar first. I don't necessarily do this one unless somebody's lifting a fairly light weight. This is what I have been taught in some courses before. So as Graham comes down, and if he starts to fail here, I might be pulling up there. And you usually shouldn't be put any more than sort of 2-3% in, because we don't load them to a point where they can't, it's such an overload that they can't get it up. They've just got a little sticking point. So Graham's in, nice and controlled, I'm ready, and you'll generally go down with them and then just help a little bit out. I don't like that technique generally, because most people, when you have to spot them, it'll be heavier. So if it's just me and a mate or somebody who lifts quite heavy, generally I'll come underneath the lats and grab their lats. Graham will come in underneath like this. So even between Graham and I, we have a different spotting technique for squats. So again, you have to be nice close. I've got his lats, and we actually squat together. So I'm just tracking down. I'm not helping at all there. I was just a presence then. I'm not helping him lift. So one more, I'll help him out. So come down. He's got a sticking point down. I'm just giving him a little bit of like a 10% lift there. Anybody that's lifting significant weight, you should be on the side here, and you'll all track down with Graham with a partner, and we'll both come down. And if he fails, we both try and come up at the same level. That can be hard with your partner, so you need to create some communication cues if you're going to take the load. Is there any more I need to discuss there, Graham? The squats?
No, I don't think so. I think just knowing the big difference between being a presence, letting someone know you're there, and being full-on spot mode, because it can be uncomfortable if it's not needed.
Yeah. So determine first whether you need to do it, should do it. Guys that I've met that really I would say that you need to spot would be guys that I need to spot with 2-3 spotters. Yeah. So otherwise you can set up and just drop the bar out.
Yeah, that and almost all gym equipment now comes with safety mechanisms, whether it be spotters arms or spotters ropes, that kind of stuff. Use that as your first point of call, because spotting can put the spotter at risk, whereas this equipment comes with mechanisms in place to protect both you and your client. So use that first, and this is more a peace of mind for your client or athlete.
And most people will fail at the same point, so at the squat you usually fail like 5 centimeters out the bottom. Bench press is usually out like 2 centimeters out the bottom. This is very common sticking point, so you can sort of put the bars where they need to be, quite easy to predict.
And don't be afraid to educate your clients to dump bars, drop weights. They're usually rubber coated, tested for that kind of stuff. I would rather damage equipment than put my client at risk or put myself at risk.
And then we'll show you a bench press splitting technique. So again, there's many trains of thought on correct bench press splitting technique. The optimal is not having the squat. So if you have squatting arms and things like that in place, if somebody's lifting heavy, ideally you want sort of 3 spotters, so 1 on each end, doing that similar technique that I show you guys. So they are actually doing a squat technique. So always thinking about the spotter safety as well, or your own safety. But generally you'll be put in a position where it's just one-on-one and you have to do the squatting. So first of all, we'll talk about getting the bar off the rack, and I know last year we talked about this a lot, but I think I just mainly talked about locking out and pulling through with your lats. I don't think we talked too much about the spotter. So if you think about Graham's position when he's unracking, he's at a mechanical disadvantage. He's not in a very strong position. So he'll lock his arms out and pull through with his lats with everything tensed, but as the spotter, generally I'll help by lifting the bar off an inch with him and track it over there. So I'm not doing a big lift, I'm just helping him and guiding him through. So it's more of just like a 1 inch lift and push. If the weight's really heavy, I'm protecting myself, I'll come in with the elbows, and it's like a squat technique for me. Remember, I'm only lifting about an inch, and then guiding him there. And then I'll say, "You okay?" And he's okay, and we're locked. So again, I'm thinking about my safety. The biggest reason people don't like squatting the bench press is they're worried about this position of me going over Graham's head. It's not the most comfortable position, but if somebody wants me to squat them on a heavy weight, they can accept that discomfort and awkwardness for the protection of my back, if you want to have a break, right? So again, you have to think about the weight, who you're spotting, what they require. Do they need me to help them lift out on a heavy lift? They're going for a personal best or something like that. Or it's a client who's doing 40 kilos and it's easy for me to lift back up. So one of the techniques that you'll see, and it's not my preferred technique, especially when it's heavy, is Graham will come off, and then I'll just be standing here, and you'll see this happen a lot. Graham comes down, and I'll just help here if he needs it. Now, if you have a look at the leverage here, I've got this big long lever here on my lumbar spine. So if somebody's only lifting sort of 20, 30 kilos, you can sort of do this, track it down, and they know that I'm there if they need it. Anything heavier, I'll come in, and I'm right over Graham's head, so it does have that awkwardness, but we're in that nice, strong position. So I can track in a nice, solid grip here, and I'm not going to give him anything unless he needs it. So going down, and I squat with it and come up. If it's crazy, you can go to elbows under. Oh, this is a little bit weirder. It's coming down. Right. So ideally, you have 2 spotters each side if it's heavy. My go-to is generally right over the top with the double hand grip, reducing my lever. And if someone's lifting a lot lighter, you can sort of just guide it. So it depends on who you're dealing with. Always think about the leverage on your back, because if I'm out here trying to pull it in, I'm going to rip my back apart trying to help him do a lift. Anything else I need to talk about?
No, I'll normally stand in a split.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Split stance is probably better.
And then come in.
Yeah.
If it's needed.
So if we go again, that takes a little awkwardness out of it a little bit. You can see my lever here, and I'm using my legs. Again, you shouldn't be loading someone up so much that you have to lift more than sort of 5%. So if somebody that you don't know in the gym is doing a one around, I'll generally, always say no to splitting them unless there's 2 of us, because they're usually doing something stupid. Trying to one around sort of 10-20% over what they can lift. Your PB attempt should only be 1-2% of your last time, and you should only really have to give them a little bit. But yeah, bench press and pressing activities, they're a hard one to spot without it being a little bit awkward. You're going to have to get over the head with your crutch to protect you. So ideally, 2 guys on each side, tracking it, or safety bars, but if you have to, in over the head, use your legs, come down with it, drive with the legs. Anything else? Okay, guys. Another huge point that we need to make are the lifting rules. So a lot of the rules from the sports that are lifting, so weightlifting, powerlifting, and CrossFitting, have sort of been pushed into the strength and conditioning field and the gym field. Like, you have to squat below 90. Now, you have to ask yourself when you're training somebody, is this person a competitive lifter? And do they need to stick to these rules? So a lot of the techniques that I'll coach for clients, quite often I'll, reduce the range in a deadlift, definitely. I rarely ever prescribe it off the floor. I modify squat technique a lot. I'll put benches so they don't go fully too deep. So I definitely don't coach ass to grass very often unless they've got really good mobility control and everything stacks up well. And so yeah, just in the back of your head, don't have these blanket rules because these are the rules of the sport. Do you want to throw anything in there?
Yeah, totally. I have one athlete that squats ass to grass and squats past parallel, and surprise, surprise, she's a weightlifter.
Yeah.
If your athlete, this specifically athletes, clients a little different but much the same. If your athlete doesn't go past 90 degrees of hip flexion in their sport, why are you training it? It's high risk, puts a lot of compressive forces on the lumbar spine just for a bit of extra glute activation at the bottom of a squat. Or we could load the squat heavier and reduce the range. I almost always squat everyone to around that 60-degree range of hip knee flexion.
Yeah, I found when you do a lot of sort of ass to grass full length squats, I found that sometimes it sort of negatively impacted the power. So I haven't read into this too much, but Graham might have had a bit of more of a read. I found that I got better at deep squats, but things like my vertical jump decreased when I did a lot of it because I sort of lost that quick short stretch shorten cycle, I guess.
Yeah.
So you got to be very careful on that. In the terms of hypertrophy, full range of movement exercises definitely increase hypertrophy, but is that your only goal? So who are you working with?
And that's not to say if you have someone come in who has a perfect squat, can squat pretty well ass to ankles with a nice spinal alignment, core bracing, the knees, the ankles are perfect, maintain that. Squat them that low if they're comfortable. But if you have someone who doesn't have quite great mobility, they're an athlete, are you going to go pushing mobility gains to improve their squat but has no translation to the field?
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And imagine the backlash from other staff, other coaches, the athlete, if they get hurt squatting deep when they're a field sport athlete, a basketball player, a footy player, when in their sprinting mechanics, they're never really going past 60 degrees of hip flexion.
Yeah.
It's just not needed. It's high risk, low reward.
And jumping rarely goes lower than 60, sort of.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the same for deadlifting. We don't need to get someone that deep in a hip flexion to create strength.
And I think in Funky and Nat, you guys will talk about the different, depth of hip, the ball and socket joint. There's different rotations of the hip. So there's a whole heap of different things that, it's really hard for us as coaches to know what's going on inside to prescribe it. So I generally just look at it and adjust it. I use all styles of squats. So, sometimes quarter, sometimes half to 90, full depth if they can do it. And again, there's no blanket rules. There's a couple of 6'6" guys that I trained that did perfectly nice deep squats. So their, tibia to femur ratio and dorsiflexion was probably, even ratio with a really high dorsiflexion. And then there's shorter athletes and with long bodies who I'll change it and make it shorter. So there's a whole heap of stuff you have to look at there. So we've done a quick video on these guys, so we won't go through it too much, but there's some common compensations that you'll see. So, just watch this and we'll talk over the video. The main concept that we need to get through here is sometimes like a little bit is okay. A lot is not so good. And if it's very high acceleration through the compensation, then you're looking at injury. So, if you've got a little bit of foot aversion, but it's manageable with a little bit of knee valgus, and I'm talking little movements, that's fine. Movement variability is fine. If it's dropping rapidly in the knee valgus, then there's an issue. But then you guys have to also go from there and go, is it lack of dorsiflexion? Is it foot strength, which is popular now? I think it's rarely foot strength. It's usually more dorsiflexion in my mind, or glute med strength at the hip. So we've got a video on this. Anything else you want to throw in before the video?
Yeah, don't be afraid to explore different movements if these are occurring. Rather than regressing someone to the point where they're doing, very shallow squats or certain type of squat where they're almost wrapped in cotton wool. Try a front squat, try a back squat. Maybe their ribs flaring because they're lacking dorsiflexion. Maybe they'll benefit from a heel lift. Don't be afraid to explore these things rather than just completely get rid of it.
And just one thing to add in there, if you think way back to 2 or 3, we were doing that reactive neuromuscular technique where we're actually trying to exaggerate these movements to correct it as well. So don't forget that you can do that. If they've got knee valgus, let's exaggerate it so they know, and we force them to switch the muscles on.
Actually, a good point of that. One of the most common things I see in this course, in Pre and Pro 2, is their partner will have a pretty common fault, like a rib flare, knee valgus, and they'll say, "Oh, Graham, how can I fix it?"
Yeah.
Just half the time, if you tell them they're doing it, they will stop.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, your athlete or client doesn't have the proprioception to know that they're going in a knee valgus or their ribs flaring. And sometimes it takes, hey, point your ribs down. Hey, I want your knees over your toes, and it'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
You should always be looking for the lowest hanging fruit first and then work your way up. So before you get a band on someone and say, resist the band, say, hey, on this next set, I want you to focus on keeping your knees out. Most of the time, that will work.
And don't use those cues as like a recipe. They're not rules. You got to play with it quite often. There's, and sometimes you have to create cues to trigger in their head. Again, every person's different and they have different little faults, and you'll see some of that stuff that commonly comes up in the next few videos. Okay, guys. So we filmed just a whole heap of those common compensations. It's all me just quickly running through them. We'll talk over them, but mainly it's just so you can see them. You'll notice that my joints are quite lax. I've got a lot of mobility, so it might not be as obvious as what you see with my joint movements. Always think like we discussed in the slides. It's a little bit's not necessarily a bad thing, and a little bit of movement variation is good, and you'll talk about that with Marseille's and Max and biomechanics. It's more the total amount and the rate. So you'll notice in my movements here, I've made sure that they look fast as well, because then you'll be really concerned. So if there was a tiny little bit of eversion or something, it won't necessarily cause any issues. But if it looks like this or variation of this, you definitely want to start trying to correct that. So we've got, here's me just showing pure eversion, which you will see in your squats and deadlifts and all those sort of lower body ones, lunges, anything like that. If you see it in running, it's not necessarily good. In running, you'll see more of this overpronation. That's a fairly big overpronation, but it gives you a good idea of what's happening there. So that's how the landing is. And again, you'll talk about that in biomechanics, but look out for that stuff. If you're seeing it in lunges, you can see that the knee will drop too. So you've always got to be thinking about whether is it coming from the ankle? Is it, I'm running out of dorsiflexion, then it drops in, or is it hip stability? And we move on to, this is a common one you'll see. So in a squat or something like that, the knees will drop. Single leg squat, the knees drop. So that can be glute weakness at the hip, lack of stability, can be lack of range in the ankle joints. This is definitely a hip stability one here. So glute med will be dropping away. You'll see that in walking as well. So you'll do analysis of that in biomechanics. So if you see that in any single leg work, you definitely need to work on hip stability. And we've done a range of things that you really need to look for in the spine. So if you're seeing any of this stuff, it's a definite time to pull them up and fix the technique. So if they can't bend from the hips without flexing through the spine first, they've got lack of control. So it could be weakness in the core or the rectus spinalis, but it can be just pure movement patterning. There can be a range of different shortnesses, tighter joints, etc. You don't want this extension look either. So I think we've tried to just put me in a neutral position there so you can see the difference when it's braced. You'll see this hyperextension in a squat. And I'm guilty of that because I've got that flexible back, so I have to really think about my core bracing if I'm loading up on the back. This is that posterior tilt look that you'll see. Some people are coaching that first. Only some people would coach that if they really needed it. You'll see this a lot in deadlifts, so that rounded spine. Where do we move from there? We needed to show you rib flare, I think we're doing here. Yeah. So you'll get this anterior tilt and the rib flare. You got to understand in all this, the stuff that we show you in this tube, it's actually quite hard to show this stuff when you've spent years training it out of you. You'll see this in overhead work, so that back extension. They'll also kick the head forward. So this is a good one here. That's with core bracing, and then the pelvis is in neutral. Moving down onto the bench, you'll see a lot of rib flare. Again, I'm guilty of this due to a lot of mobility, and I've got to focus on my core bracing, otherwise it comes out. So you can see the ribs protruding there, so they're leaving that line of engagement with the hips. But again, for years I've practiced not doing it, so I have to think about it. But that's, if you see that real rib flare look there, you need to coach the bracing in the core and bring that pelvis to ribs type position that you learned last year. And then we move on to a couple more overhead things, I think. So shoulders. So this is what we mean by that anterior glide of the humeral head. So if I don't retract my scap, all that pressure is going there on the humeral head anteriorly, so forward. So it's put a lot of strain on the front of the capsule, potentially cause a dislocation. If I retract my scap there, you see how that takes that away. So I can go to a fairly deep range of movement in the row there if I've got my scap retracted. The white shirt sort of washes it out a little bit. You see this a lot, that head forward position. A lot of office workers end up looking like this as well. Overhead, they'll kick it forward. You'll see it in squats and deadlifts. So you look out, you don't want that chin up position. We used to coach that a lot. Definitely don't want to see it in the overhead position. Okay, so you need that chin tuck position because there's a lot of load going through that cervical spine. We showed it in the hip hinge again. So you're really just looking to keep that chin tucked, and I'll give you a good example coming up here. So chin tuck, that looks much better. The loading patterns through the shoulders and the neck are much better there. And that's it for the common compensations. So any of those are straight up no-nos. You need to work on those because they're going to cause issues and damage down the track. And then we're going to move in and show you squat, bench press, and deadlift from here. Things to think about: your client's weight. So if they're really heavy, is a single leg squat going to suit them? Because that takes all the weight to one leg, so that's significant. Their height usually matters. Very much. When you're looking at football players, AFL players, basketball players, they're going to be quite tall. Resistance training with tall people is quite often different, and I'll use half reps and stuff like that. And you'll see some of that stuff that happens in the videos. Ratios are important, and you guys will explore this a little bit more in Funky and Nat, and definitely biomechanics. If the femur is significantly longer than the tibia, you'll see different movement patterns. If the ulna is really long, that means that the elbow is pretty much touching the floor in a bench press. If the lower body is, if the person's 2 meters tall and the lower body is 1.5 meters, that will look very different to if it's 1 meter and 1 meter, and if it's the other way, 1/2 meter legs, and not that happens, but I'm just showing you an exaggeration. And then the Q angle, so you guys should know what the Q angle is now, that the angle at the hip, and that can be exaggerated with female athletes. So, technique should change for that as well. Anything we want to throw on there? No. Yeah. I'll send you guys the slides. Click on that video. It's a very good video. It's, just to get your mind around this idea of the different ratios. And then we've got some videos exploring all these different bar positions in the squat. Having a look at this slide. This comes from I can't remember the name of the book. I'll put the little link in there later on. But just things like, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but if you look at the femur length, this is the kind of stuff we're looking at here, where a longer femur will generally push the torso into a deeper flexion at the hip. So, do they have the hip flexion to achieve that? That's a huge part of the reason why people get the posterior tilt or the butt wink that you talk about. So it's not necessarily hamstring tightness. They might not have the ability at the hip to do that level of flexion. So again, it's very hard you can't get an x-ray of each one of your clients. So you just got to be able to know what to look for.
Yeah, while we're speaking about butt wink, that seems to be the flavour of the month that everyone wants to attack for the last 5 years. It's almost never tight hamstrings.
Yeah.
It's almost always anatomical or a weak core. And we've got videos later where I've kind of squatted without core bracing and see a butt wink. And with simple core cueing, you can usually get rid of a lot of it. But it's very rarely muscle tightness that causes a butt wink, more an anatomical end range and limit where you've run out of space in that hip capsule and it's hitting, and in turn, your hip must rotate.
Yeah, and that's and I don't know where the data is on this, but they talk about the Eastern European lifters and why they're so good, and everyone started following their training regimes, but when they looked at their hips, they had a shallower cap, which allowed them to go into deeper flexion. I can't remember where I saw this stuff. So, we all went and followed their training regimes, but they were actually just structurally different. Whereas, I remember when I was reading the paper, I don't even think it was a paper, it was just probably an article that someone else wrote or a blog. I think people with Scottish, like Northern United Kingdom background had really deep set femurs or acetabulums.
Yeah.
So, you can't control that and you can't stretch them into that.
Yeah.
But the only muscles that makes sense to me that would cause a posterior tilt would be the deep hip external rotators, that posterior capsule, they don't allow any more flexion. Other than that, I can't see, because the hamstring's a 2-joint muscle, so that can't be doing it.
Yeah, and also remember that a neutral spine is a range of degrees. It's not X degrees. So if someone gets a little bit of a tilt, are we going to completely stop them squatting in that spot?
Yeah.
We can give some cues and try and correct it, but slight movements in the spine, I'm not so afraid of.
Yeah, and you might be getting a little, if it's a little movement, a little stretch shorten cycle. I mean, your back's not going to fall apart with a 5 mils of movement.
So a beginner squatter, if they're dumping the pelvis and getting lots of butt wink, I want to control that because they haven't had the load and compression through their spinal discs and their vertebrae to be able to tolerate that. Whereas someone who has habitually squatted with load for 10 years and can squat really low might get a bit of pelvic tilt of 1 or 2 degrees at the bottom. I'm not going to go chasing to correct that because they've had so much loading that they've created stimulus in their discs to create a thicker disc, a stronger disc.
Yeah. And just one point I'll make here, guys, is that picture has the person squatting with a big extension. Don't do that. This book's pretty old, but it's the only one I've ever found that talks about these different ratios of leg lengths and stuff like that. So we're going to go through all these technique areas, so I won't talk about them here. Okay, so we've got a range of squats that were filmed here. Graham and I are both going to try and sort of chat you through this one a little bit more than what we did in the last video. So what we've started with was and it's hard to see, and like I said earlier, it's actually really hard for us to do these poor techniques. We really have to think about it because we've spent 15 odd years training this stuff training ourselves out of these movements. But the first one is a rotating pattern. It can be a little bit slight, and you might not always see it. Generally, what I've found is it can either happen from one leg shorter than the other, but more common, one leg's extending a little bit faster than the other one. So have a watch of these next few squats, and you've got Graham first, and then I do it as well. So you can see Graham's even just trying to figure out how to do it. But if you watch his leg, he's jamming one out locked early. And then he's just figuring it out there. But the next one's, when it clips over the next one, I think we really see the rotation.
That could come from a previous injury as well. Maybe leg dominance. You have someone in a kicking sport who spends a lot of time on that stance leg.
So you can see that if you watch the bar, you can see the bar rotates when that happens. It can be things like maybe one dorsiflexion, one side's got more dorsiflexion than the other. That can happen. So you can see, I'm trying to figure it out, but you can definitely see the bar straightens up earlier. And you can see my squat's not great when the heels aren't lifted. So we're going to talk about that later as well.
How would you fix that?
So first of all, you got to try and figure out what it is. Sometimes you can just coach out the one leg straightening earlier than the other. So it's like just focus on even timing.
Yep. I personally would focus on the eccentric portion and pauses. I think I alluded to earlier in this shoot that a lot of the time it seems overcomplicated, but if you simply tell your athlete or client that they're doing it and make them aware of it, and put them in the best position to fix it themselves. And if we give them more time figuring out that pattern, so say a 3 second down, 3 second up, lightening the load, making them really focus on those positions. You can even put a dowel in front of their knees with contact to both the knees and say, hey, if you're extending one leg too early, you're going to feel it leave the dowel. I need you to push both legs against the dowel as you stand up. Just giving them a tactile cue and letting them become aware of their patterns, probably going to put them in the best position. There's not always a one key term blanket fix to fix these cues.
No, and even like something as simple with something like that, if it's purely one leg straightening earlier, in front of the mirror is good for that stuff. So just watch that.
Film it for them.
And then you can do the dorsiflexion test that we did. See if it's that. Leg length. We've shown you guys how to measure leg length. Anything over, I think 10 centimeters and beyond, that's significant, but there is usually a normal slight variation, so don't go crazy if it's like 5 mil. But and we'll show you later. I have a little bit of the issues because I've got tibial torsion, so that's actually my tibia twist. So if I don't purposely twist my knee out, I'll get sort of things that look like this as well.
Yeah, I've had basketball athletes with pretty significant differences in leg length, and he will squat with one shoe on, one shoe off, and I will correct it. His hips will stay square and he won't rotate.
And that's just, something like that. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to, sometimes I'll chop one heel and not the other.
That's someone that's 30 years old who's dealt with it their whole life and they know how to fix it. And that's by performing the exercise with one shoe on, then that's what they need.
So yeah, something significant like that. Back to your scope of practice. Sorry guys, we got interrupted again. I don't think we've been interrupted once until this week, and we've been interrupted 3 times. So I think I was going to talk about scope of practice. So it's not for you to diagnose leg length differences. You can measure these things, but then you can't say that they've got this. You need to push them onto another practitioner, so like a physiotherapist or a podiatrist can do that kind of stuff. Dorsiflexion you can measure and work on, but I generally still would push them towards a physiotherapist as well, because it may be tightness in the Achilles or the gastrocnemius, but it could be something more significant.
Yeah, and if you're putting things in place like getting them to squat with one lift or one shoe on, that might exacerbate their problems. So in the situation that I talked about, that was something that he had diagnosed by a doctor when he was young, and essentially as he got through life, physios and doctors said, this is the best course of practice for you, and I simply adopted what he was told to do by doctors and physios. It's not as if I went and said, hey, let's try squatting with one shoe on, because I don't fully understand the pathology of what's happening there, and by me doing that, I might exacerbate those problems.
So we can't ignore the advice of doctors and physios and stuff, and we definitely can't diagnose. That's not within our scope. One thing that sat with me from years ago, and I can't quite remember it, you might have heard Dan say it, but I remember Dan Melfond talking about that certain percentage of musculoskeletal symptoms is actually like a cancer or something like that. And he said he's never diagnosed cancer, so he thinks within my career, and he'd done 20 years of physiotherapy, so he definitely would have missed some of these diagnoses. Because cancer does weird things. You can have pain in the ankle when it's cancer in your hip, sort of thing. And for somebody like that to say, "Well, I've definitely missed it," it definitely sat with me and I was like, very much pass it on then.
Yeah.
Because if somebody who's trained in that realizes that they can miss such a significant amount and such a significant diagnosis, well, then I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm doing.
Never be afraid to refer. Never be afraid to say no to training people and referring. I've had athletes come wanting to train with me, wanting to pay good money to recruit my services, and I've flat out said no. And until you go see a occupational therapist or a hand therapist or a physio or a doctor and get that clearance, it's not, it's doing you a disservice, me trying to train you, and it's putting me at risk and a liability if you get hurt.
Yeah. So let's move on. We're not sure where we were before enough to. Oh, so we're showing you that you see this sort of rolling pattern sometimes, and we've definitely sort of overdone it because we had to figure out how to show you. So you can see as we come down, we kind of drive our knees forward, and I don't do it naturally because I don't have that extra dorsiflexion. They'll kind of drive their knees forward, and it looks like they're rolling, but they're essentially trying to put the load back more on their quads.
Yeah.
For many reasons, maybe they don't have the glute strength or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Avoiding some pain, or
if that starting position is poor and they can't get themselves in the right position, they'll usually try and shift to get that center of mass back over their feet.
Yeah. So yeah, these ones that we've shown you, Graham and I doing, and I'll just go back.
They're exaggerated.
They're exaggerated, but you will see it, and it looks like they're rolling, and it happens in the deadlift a little bit too. So
now, if that happens too rapidly, that weight can kind of go forward and then back.
you got to think about any heavy loading. If we're going to like an anterior posterior sort of movement, I'll just pause there. With 150 kilos in your back, that's not a good thing. So again, look out for that one. I see it often with people with really good dorsiflexion, so they're almost dorsiflexion biased, and they'll push into it all the time.
Yeah.
To load their quads, because I've found, just in my experience, again, I've never read it anywhere, but people with really, really flexible ankles, I find they don't engage their glutes that well. So they're definitely quad dominant. So you have to coach them to sit back, and then they will do things like that. And then people who don't have great dorsiflexion, they're usually hip dominant.
Yeah.
And then you have to coach them to drive the knees forward.
Which is the next one.
Yeah. So we'll show you that now.
This is probably the more common one that I see.
Yeah.
That's definitely a more dominance of the post chain, lower back, weak quads, poor positioning at the bottom of the squat. If they lack the dorsiflexion to keep that bar over their midfoot, they'll shoot the bum up.
And you'll see that in, you don't see Graham and I doing it much here, but you'll see a lot of back flexion when people do this as well. I'll just pause that there to show you that again. I think as well that sometimes it's just they are dominant in the quads and there's no glutes, so they're driving the quads first for that extension. So it could be a little bit of both, really. So if there's sort of no glute work going on there, they'll get that sort of look too.
Yeah, or if they get that early extension.
Yeah. Again, it might be just motivate. So I've fixed people's doing that by just coaching them to drive through the hips, and then sometimes I just put them like a awareness behind the knees, like I put my hand there and say, don't touch my knees.
Yeah, and the course of action is almost always the same for myself, and that's slow down the tempo, put in eccentrics, lighten the load. I'm gonna give them a tactile cue. I might put one hand on their lower back, one hand on their shoulders, and say these need to rise at the same time, and just let them have that time under tension with a lighter load so they can feel the positions. That's essentially just practice.
Yeah. So I always think in the back of your mind, and I don't know if you guys have done it yet, motor control and learning type stuff. So you need to do reps to learn it. So, if they're not doing it 100% yet, don't just keep grinding at them to get it right straight away. Allow them the time to learn it. It might take someone, 1,500 reps to get it. So you've got to work with that process as well. It's not always a mobility issue. It can be a motor control issue and just a technique learning issue.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to slightly change the pattern. We'll go over different squat types later, but if someone's having those issues with a higher bar squat, and maybe it's because they're dominant in their lower back or their glutes or whatnot, maybe they're more suited towards a low bar, and you investigate that and find something that best fits them.
Yeah.
And it's not something that, we don't fix that issue. But if I can give them a pattern that they're going to be able to master, and then with my accessory exercises, try and develop things to improve that other squat pattern, I can still get some work done and create a stimulus without putting them at risk.
Yeah. So we're moving on to a hip shift. You'll probably see this this is probably second after the knees first drive. And it can be for a number of reasons. So it could be, shifting because they're avoiding some pain or tightness one side, and it might be subconscious. We've definitely had to exaggerate this, but you can see, so the first couple Graham was showing us a shift on the way out of the bottom.
I actually do this a little bit as well because I have no cartilage in one of my knees.
So you see that driving out, he's pushing to the side, but then you'll also see it as they're coming down. So you can see he's pushing to one side. There's a range of reasons for that. You could have, again, leg length discrepancy, dorsiflexion, asymmetries. The posterior capsule on one of my hips could be tighter. Mine actually, I do get a little bit of it from that tibial torsion that I was talking about. So this is exaggerated. I do have a little bit of it, like Graham was saying, for him, but you can't really see the slight ones on camera. We moved on here. Yeah. Anything else we need to talk about hip shift wise?
Same thing. Let them know they're doing it. Give them a tactile cue. Sometimes it's as simple as putting a dowel next to the knee in the direction they're shifting and saying, hey, if you're squatting up and your knee touches that dowel, you've shifted. So I want you to avoid that dowel, or even the other way, put the stick on the opposite side and say, I need you to keep contact with my hand or the dowel as you squat up. Squatting in front of a mirror, tempos, eccentrics, just time and practice.
You can use some of the other stuff that we learned sort of shoot 2 and 3, where we did sort of the reactive neuromuscular technique. So I actually pull the band, pulling them into the side they go so that they have to focus on against it. Bottoms up squats. We've given you a lot of tools to work with this. You're going to have to just use this awareness and go back there and go, hey, I can do this.
Just don't overcomplicate it.
So then we're showing you the butt wink, and you'll look at my squat. And you see, if I try a deep squat without my heels elevated, I have a horrible squat. So there's a lot of that posterior tilt, and there's a lot of lumbar flexion there. Now remember, I'm pretty flexible. So I've got normal range of dorsiflexion if we measure it on a wall or with angles. But I'm also, tall, and I've probably got really long femurs compared to my tibia. I haven't done the ratios. So when I sit back, my weight shifts back and it pulls me out of that dorsiflexion to counter it, and I have to drop my hips on my torso forward to counter that change in weight so that the barbell stays over my feet. So there's nothing that we could really do to fix that for me in a back squat. And I've tried. No, trust me, the arse to grass, that was popular in 2005, 2006 when I was getting into gym and fitness. And I tried to grind through it back then. It went away for a little while, and it's popular again now. And I've got the opinion as what I had then. You have to change it up for different body shapes. It doesn't suit everybody. So I think what we were saying in the slides is that there's a range of reasons this can happen. I think for me, it's purely biomechanics, with maybe a little bit of posterior capsule tightness, which brings the pelvis down with it. And I probably just literally run out of flexion room in my hip joint.
And there's nothing wrong with getting you to squat 5 to 10 degrees higher than what's in that picture before you go into that post-tilted butt wink. Especially if you're say you're an athlete who plays rugby or basketball, and when you're sprinting, your knee or hip ankle is rarely more than 60 degrees. Why put you in that position and risk it when I can just get you to squat slightly higher? You can still lift heavy, you can still lift safely, and there's no risk there.
There was a pretty clever strength coach that I used to talk to a bit, and he said, once you're in this position in a contact sport, you're stuffed anyway. There's nothing you can do. Because if there's a 120 kilo guy pushing me and my hips are in that much flexion, it doesn't matter how much training I've done, because that guy's going to be in triple extension and I'm in deep hip flexion. He didn't use the word stuffed, but
I can imagine.
You can see where we're going there. So you can see, and you'll see my squat improve as we play with it in the later sections.
The flavor of the month is to go after the butt wink and try and correct it, and it's not needed. Just squat them higher, teach them some core bracing. I think we go over some bracing later, and maybe And
it's kind of like the power cleans too, like the amount of work you have to do to gain that arse to grass.
So you can see I'm butt winking there, and that's because I'm not bracing my core at all. Whereas now, if you see I brace really hard, we limit a lot of that butt wink.
I think this one's where you're
Yeah,
bracing.
there's bracing. So it's about 1 to 2 degree there.
It's only slight, but you can see it's a much better squat. And you can see with Graham, he's got a similar body shape to me, but he must have like a better tibia to femur ratio. He's got definitely better dorsiflexion, but when he squats down, your body allows you to use it. Whereas mine, even though I drive my knees forward, the center of mass pulls me back and pulls that tibia, that dorsiflexion away.
Yeah.
So you got to look at that kind of stuff, right? Like, you know, if somebody falls over in a squat, you know, I've seen people try and fix it. It's like their femurs are just too long sometimes, you know, for the back squat. And you'll see when we do a front squat for me, that stuff just sorts itself out. So it's just biomechanics. Where are we at here? I can't remember what we're doing.
That's still bracing. Yeah. Don't be afraid if someone's having a butt wink. Teach them some decent bracing. You're going to teach them to turn that kind of lower abdomen on, because what's happening in a butt wink a lot of the time is once our hip or our femur hits on that pelvis, it's turning the pelvis. So with tight core bracing and our core patent and braced, it's going to resist that moving of the pelvis from the femur fouling in that joint.
And then remember, if you're hitting that femur, you're going to create some impingement. So what we've done here, guys, is we've just played with the stances. So just pay attention. There's not heaps to talk about here, but we've got Graham with a sort of a narrower stance. He was meant to have his feet flat, but he's already just twisted out to what he naturally does. No, because this is the wide grip, it's a wide stance. So this is a wide stance. Graham really didn't like this stance, but you can see it does change his technique a little bit.
Definitely a lot more leaned over.
He doesn't look as controlled there. And then we went to Graham's preferred stance. And, you know, he's trained this as well, so he's obviously going to be much better. But you can see it looks like a nicer squat in that sort of just wider than hips.
Yeah.
But you can, you know, people with longer legs, you can go a bit of a wider stance because it kind of shortens the lever, essentially, if you look at it. So instead of it being straight front to back, if we go to the angle a little bit, it sort of makes the femur shorter. And you can see that in that page on the slide a little bit when he does that. And then with the heel lift, which sort of gives us kind of a little bit of extra dorsiflexion and pushes the weight forward a little bit.
Yeah, so definitely more upright when the heels are elevated. And whenever our torso is more upright, we're going to be a lot more quad dominant. So if we were looking to develop the anterior chain, the lower body, heel elevation would be perfect. Whereas if we were looking for more post chain, you'd try and go for more flat foot.
Yeah.
But definitely if we're lacking dorsiflexion and we're trying to squat them now, heel lifting is probably the first go-to there.
Yeah. And then some, you know, a lot of the guru type guys are saying you have to get a squat where you can go barefoot or ass to grass. But if you look at me, guys, you know, again, I've got like hypermobility in most of my joints. Dorsiflexion is probably where I'm most restricted, but it's still considered normal. Having a look at my squat here, you know, there's nothing we could do. Like, there's a huge forward lean to counter that femur length. So what are we going to do? If you watch, the wider stance gets a little better because I've essentially shortened up my femurs. So it looks a little bit better, but again, if you go side on, you can see that it actually drives that butt wink earlier. And that's because I'm probably running out of room quicker. So I wouldn't be happy to load that either. I hope you guys appreciate this, because both Graham and I pulled up sore hips and sore backs today doing all this poor technique stuff. And then sort of a normal stance. You know, this is where I would generally squat and train at. And I've got to do, and you can see that I'm playing with that. Well, I have to sort of lock the tibial torsion out. It looks a little better, but I still wouldn't be happy loading somebody that looks like that.
Agreed.
We get side on, huge lean forward. We get that butt wink early. You know, anything past 90 for me in that sort of position, I'm getting butt wink. I think I mentioned in the slides we were talking about, you know, acetabulum and, you know, different areas of family history, and, you know, my last name's Stewart, so there's probably some Scottish in there. And I said they're deeper. I haven't had it measured, but potentially I might have a deeper acetabulum than somebody that's Eastern European. And now if you watch this, it's a much better squat. I think I generally use a heel lift that's even a little higher than that.
Yeah.
I've got proper squat shoes that I usually work in. But even then you can see guys like that's improved significantly. Straight back, bars over the center of my feet. Even the dorsiflexion looks better. I drive my knees forward first. So if I was coaching myself, my cue would be drive my knees forward rather than sit back, which is what I would usually start with when I'm coaching someone.
Yeah.
But for me, a knee drive first fixes my squat up. A little bit of posterior tilt there. But if you watch my front squat, and that's what I usually train, it's a much better squat. So here we play with bar position. So you can see just by manipulating the bar.
If you pause it and start there, because I'm going to get the Zoom meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll just restart.
Okay, guys. Sorry, we got a little bit distracted again there. And we interrupted. Again, it's pretty funny. We've been interrupted so many times during this shoot, and every other shoot we didn't have anyone interrupt us. So we were up to discussing just adjusting where the bar sits. So you've got the option of a high bar squat, a low bar squat, and a front squat. They're the barbell options. You've also got goblets and kettlebells and all that kind of stuff. They're the three that we wanted to show you that you can really significantly change the technique and leverage just by changing the bar sets. So the high bar squat is up essentially on top of the traps. Probably the best way to describe it without showing you. And I suggest you guys, once the gyms are open, get in and try all this stuff because it's the only way to do it. Again, my feedback from the practical assessment is you could just tell that people haven't done these exercises enough to really coach them. I think I explained it to a couple of guys, like it would be like me going and just trying to coach rugby. I've played it a couple of times, but I couldn't coach it, all the defensive stuff. So let's have a look here. We've got, I think we get Graham doing all three and then myself doing all three. You've got Graham with the high bar squat.
So typically high bar will be very upright torso and the tibias will be right over, knees over toes.
So then we roll down to the low bar, which sits more on your sort of rear delt, infraspinatus almost.
Now you can see it reverses. The torso is very leaned over and the tibias are a bit more upright. Yeah. So it's a lot more post chain in that low bar squat.
And it'll change, it actually reduces the lever on the lumbar as well. So if it's lower back pain or something that you're trying to avoid, that can help a little bit.
Yeah. Front squat.
So this shifts the load to the other side.
So that's the most upright of all the squats. More tibia angle, so very quad dominant pattern.
So now you can see a real difference when you look at my squat. So already you can see I've got a better squat with the heel lift and then the knees driving forward first. But that's on the high bar position.
Now pay attention to how the angles change when he rolls the bar down his back.
So I've got a very low bar position there. It does put a lot of extra pressure on the shoulders. A little bit more forward leaning. You can see a little bit extra lumbar flexion on me there as well. So I wouldn't prescribe that for me after looking at that. And then this is my preferred squat for my body shape. It's a much nicer looking squat. Yeah. So I don't put a bar on my back very often. If I do, I'm on a higher heel lift than that. I'm much more upright now. My back's in a safer position. I can go deeper. There's less tilt in the pelvis. Anything else we need to throw in there at all?
No, I don't think so.
So you can see, and don't be scared, guys, to try 5, 6 different techniques with your clients. I'd give them goblet squats, back squat, front squat, kettlebells, hands to the side. I'd figure out what looks best for my client.
Yeah. I typically won't prescribe a low bar squat because I don't see much merit in a sporting realm. But if someone's anthropometry set, like kind of dictates that their high bar back squat looks a little crappy, I will go to a low bar squat. If that's the squat that looks best, I'll prescribe it.
I lean towards the front squat for developing quads and the deadlift for developing glutes hammy, like posterior chain. So my go-to will be front squat and deadlift. But like I said, I change it up a lot. I use a lot of single leg work and all that kind of stuff. So, and then Graham's not so much of a front squat guy as me. Dale is probably more on my side. He likes the front squat. Chris, who you had last year, he's very much double kettlebell front squat. So each coach will have their preference as well. But the low bar for me is very much a power lifter.
Yeah.
They're just trying to lift the most weight. So if you're training powerlifters, low bar is probably going to be your option. I can't remember what we do here. I think we're going to start looking at my tibial torsion. Or is that, I think that's just showing you guys. So this is the difference.
Hips first.
If I go hips first, can you see and that's knees first there. There's a slight difference, but I think it's a much better squat if I drive knees first. Yeah. I'll go back, guys, so you can just see. That's hips back. So I get a lot more forward lean, a lot more pressure on the lumbar spine there. Knees first. It's a little bit more upright.
Usually I'll prescribe hips back first.
Yeah.
In an athletic population sport, usually my first goal is injury prevention, mostly ACL prevention. We know that the way the hamstring attaches on the back of the tibia actually assists with reducing ACL strain forces. So in a injury prevention realm, coaching hips back in the squat actually pre-tensions the hamstring and will actually protect the ACL.
Yeah. So again, I think I mentioned it earlier. I've had people who I have to coach hips back, and then there's other people I have to coach knees forward. And then your go-to will be generally a little bit of a hips back and drop.
Yeah,
but
it only has to be subtle.
Yeah,
just 1 millimeter of hips back will prime the hamstring, so that pat doesn't have to be exaggerated.
And then we just threw this in here so you guys can see. And I don't know how well you can see it, but like I said, in that right tibia, I've got what's called a tibial torsion. So when if I have my foot facing forward, my knee will drop in. So what I do is I lock it out there, and then it cleans it up a little bit. You can see that's a little bit better there on that one. It's locked, but it's not. You can't see it. You can see a little knee drop there, but locking it out gives me a much better squat, and my dorsiflexion is better because my tibia is working in the proper plane that my ankle wants to work in. I think I do back normal there. Again, that's my bone is twisted. There's not much you can do about it. So the main take home from message I'd say from this is the compensations that you will see. We've done them very exaggerated, but you'll get a good eye for that. And that you'll need to experiment and change technique for each person's body shape. It's a little bit of a shame that Graham and I are pretty similar body shape wise, because you will get people who are all legs. They could be 6'6", and the legs are pretty much the whole body, and they've got this tiny little torso. And then sometimes you get these people who are all torso, really short legs, and it all changes. So once you get out there, start paying attention to how different people squat, because it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody should be back squat, no shoes, ass to grass. If you can take that home, you're probably ahead of 95% of trainers. Yeah. Okay, looking at the bench press, this is the same book. So things you need to be aware of is that humeral ratio to the forearm. So you've got some pictures there. Which one's the best one? Probably the one on the right here. That's a longer longer forearm. So radius and ulnar. So the elbow is going to go further down than the bench, whereas with a shorter arm, they'll be in line with the bench. The thickness of the chest bones, so down the bottom left there, will definitely influence somebody's bench press. So generally, if somebody's got like this short femur and a really big barrel chest, they're going to be bench pressing more than somebody with longer limbs and a not so barrel chest. So gives them different mechanical advantage, and that's sometimes the reason somebody's much stronger. So, you know, the longer arms, you know, they better go do some swimming or boxing or something because they're not going to win bench press comps. So, yeah, you're a bit of a slave to your mechanics. Again, we've done videos on this, so we'll talk more about these, but these are the common technical errors you'll see. Okay guys, very similar video to the squat. We're going to show you some common compensations in the bench press, different ways to modify the bench press, and just things for you to look at. So if you remember from the slides, one of the most important things to look at is arm length, humerus to forearm, so that's your radius ulnar ratio, and how sort of barrel chested the person is. So I think we start off with Graham just doing some normal bench press, so just good technique stuff, so you've got something to compare with. You got we're talking about there whether we're going to teach the wrist stuff, and we do that later on.
One of the big things with the bench is making sure that forearm's nice and straight at the bottom, so that push, all of our weight is coming, all of our force is coming through the arm and through the bar. Find if that forearm's kind of in front or behind of the bar, we can't put all that force in the right plane.
Yeah, so when you're trying to figure out somebody's grip width, have a look at the bottom, because that's what you're looking for.
That straight forearm is usually key.
Yeah, and look at straight as in, that plane, and then, I don't even know if I'm going to show you it, this plane, that plane, it needs to be completely vertical in all planes. That'll be your strongest position.
You can definitely tell I'm bracing because I look like I'm about to blow a valve.
Yeah. If we concentrate on the vein there on the top of Graham's head. So what we're showing you here is, if I pause it, right at that bottom bit there. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, sorry. But that's with no retraction of the scaps. So you can see that anterior translation that we were talking about when we were talking about common compensations, that the humerus is getting all this force sliding forward, and then puts all that pressure on the anterior capsule, and the long-headed biceps getting that pressure as well. So that under load over and over and over again without adequate recovery could potentially cause tears, injury, all that kind of stuff. Definitely labral type tears if you just keep doing that overload without recovery at least. Anything else you want to throw on there?
No, yeah, definitely see it a lot with poor bench form, deep bar and regular bar dips seem to become flavor of the month. And they are good for building eccentric chest strength, but once we get into that anterior glide position, we're opening up a world of issues for that shoulder capsule.
Again, think about the person you're dealing with. So deep full range barbell dips with somebody who's a little bit shorter and lighter, like a gymnast, the people who do that, it's probably not going to give them any troubles.
Long arms.
Someone like myself, for example, 6'3", long arms for my body, and Graham's similar as well, and at my leanest, 90 to 95 kilos, quite often get up over 100. That becomes a lot of pressure on my shoulder joint. So you always got to be thinking about those other things too, like that you don't have these technical rules. I have no issues with a gymnast doing full range dips. Myself, I don't do it because that leverage is high. I've got lots of range of movement, so then you see a huge anterior glide.
High risk, low reward. There's plenty of other ways that we can load the pec in that outer or end range without putting that strain on the front of the shoulder capsule and risking subluxation.
Yeah, so it's always relative, guys, and if I really, really worked on it for a long period of time, low, started off low load, followed our programming principles, in a year, I'd probably be happy for myself to do a deep barbell deadlift, and as long as there's adequate recovery and time to build that strength and ligament strength and all that kind of stuff. But again, like the power clean stuff that we taught you, that's a lot of invested time to develop something that, do I need it? So,
agreed.
And as long as I've got normal range of movement there and normal strength there, I don't really need to train it. What are we moving on to here?
This is elbows too far in.
So we've gone, so there's no arch now, guys, or no arc, and he's going full range. So you can see with a person with long arms like Graham, he's not barrel chested. What you start seeing is this common compensation where the bar will actually slip forward of the elbow. So the bar's moving towards the knees essentially, which will create internal rotation at the bottom. So if you can see me in the camera, it looks like this. That's exaggerated, obviously. And then to come out of that lift under a lot of load, I'm going to be externally rotating. So if we're getting very heavy there and you're getting this internal, external rotation at the bottom at end range of movement, you're potentially going to cause issues. So, you know, it's only slight, but just be aware if somebody's got long forearms, they're out wide with a flat chest, there's going to be that rotational force on the bench press.
Next one's, I believe, hip lift. Yeah. So you can see there, usually when the weight gets heavy, people usually try and push their legs and lift the bum.
You know, that can be a range of things. Like it's a compensation everyone goes to do, but if they've got longer lower legs, they're going to be able to bridge up higher and easier. So they're going to go for it more, especially in that heavier range. You go to try and use everything you've got.
And leg drive is huge in the bench press, but if our hips lifting, means we're probably getting a bit of rib flare going on and putting a lot of pressure in one specific area of the spine. More so the more a global tension, it's very concentrated.
You'll see this a lot, forward head.
I think people just do it because it looks cool. It's not.
What happened now?
That's the wrists.
Oh yeah, so don't think I went far enough back before, guys. So just this is your head forward.
It's usually people trying to keep tension and stay nice and tight through the lat. But by keeping that lat tight and lifting the head, we just put ourselves in a thoracic and cervical flexion under pretty end range, heavy load. Not worth it.
Next one you see lots to see. Pay attention to his wrist there, so that the weight's hanging back in his hand back here towards the fingers. You have to play with the grip. It kind of sits on an angle, and the force should be going straight down your forearm. So it should be like that.
So we can see that the forearms are straight, but the barbell's actually behind my forearm. So when I'm pushing, I'm actually not having the most efficient line of force through my chest there because the weight's behind where I'm pushing.
There's a bit of a lag, and there's just like over force there as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of stress to the wrist joint.
I have had one client who I just could not coach that out of, no matter what. So I just couldn't give him those anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know if you come across that.
A lot of the time you'll find that wearing a wrist strap or a powerlifting strap can fix that up because it is a little scary to hold a bar here. You feel like it's going to fall out. With the wrist strap, you can kind of put a fair bit of tension and sit back a little bit.
Another thing I used to do, and it's from years of martial arts, I used to get guys doing knuckle push-ups to learn how to have that strength there.
Yeah.
But that's getting a little bit hardcore for some general pop. So yeah, watch that because that's a lot of wrist pressure, especially once it gets heavy. We did all the same things with me, so we'll just quickly go through these. But this is your normal bench press, and you can see with me, years of surfing, I've got this habit of a little bit of a rib flare anyway, so I have to really focus on not having it. You can see long forearms, long arms. There's a fair bit of range of movement there for me, even in the normal with an arc. This is the anterior glide, so I'm not retracting my scaps. You can really see it there. If you remember from EPP1, guys, I've got plenty of range of movement. I've got the ability to retract my scaps all the way back till they're pretty much touching, but I'll still get this a little bit at the end range. This is no retraction though. This is moving on to the no arch, elbows wide, so I'm not very barrel chested either, and you'll get this internal rotation happening at the shoulder. And this is why I think I have a lot of shoulder and neck problems now that I'm old.
Yeah.
So you're looking for that rotation of the shoulders under loads, not necessarily a good thing over time.
We usually see that internal rotation when people bench with more of a T shape than an A. It's hip lift.
Hip lift. I struggled to show you this one, guys, because I was spent so much time trying to train that out of my move. I don't do much benching these days anyway. Head forward happens a lot. Sometimes you get the head forward and then they kick the head forward and then hip extend.
Yeah, double whammy.
Then we're showing you guys here the different grips. So this is Graham's normal grip. So
I would say that's regular, not for me, but for most people.
So you see with a little bit of an arc and the wider grip, elbows at an angle, he was taking out a lot of those issues that we discussed.
So because I have quite a long wingspan, it's actually 6 centimeters longer than my total height. That bar path is very long. So you can see once I go to a wide grip, that length to push the bar is much shorter. My forearm position's much better, and I can get a lot more involvement from the pec with that wider position.
So that's the wider position there.
And it's just because I have long arms and not much of a barrel chest.
And this is a close grip, guys. So you'll see the range of movement increases. The movement pattern changes significantly. And we're going to show you at the end the movement pattern stuff if you can't see that.
Close grip is very tricep dominant.
Generally used for an accessory. Same thing for me here. So this is sort of your normal grip. You can see that my elbows are reasonably tucked, but that takes out a lot of the issues that we've shown you guys. I don't have that internal rotation or the anterior glide. A little bit of rib flare though, I need to work on that. Again, I don't do this very often.
It's wide.
Wide grip.
I can see with Dave, because he has quite long arms as well. You see how that range shortens up, the forearms a little straighter.
And I get a lot more pec involvement in that position.
Yeah. And that's risk reward. Yeah, the range is shorter. Yeah, a lot more pec involvement, but with a wider grip on the bar, probably a little bit more load to the shoulder joint. And it's just very specific to people's anthropometry and how they're made up.
And then this is just a close grip again. Pay attention to the range of movement. The pattern is completely different. Still the same major muscles, prime muscles are the same, but it puts more focus on the tricep and anterior delt, whereas the wider grips more pec and anterior delt. You know, you're always getting pec, anterior delt, and tricep, just the focus shifts. You can see the bar in these closer grips comes further down the rib cage. And then this is just if you can't see that movement pattern difference, just pay attention. That's a tricep extension. This is a fly. So you can see a close grip looks like a tricep extension. And a wider grip looks like a fly. So that's more chest and tricep for the close grip. So same thing for me. That's a tricep extension. If you see as I progress down, that's what a close grip bench looks like. Obviously slightly different, but you can see how it's more tricep extended. And that's a fly. That's what a wider grip bench press looks like. So we're getting more focus on the chest. Just if you couldn't conceptualize that difference in movement and it all looks the same to you, that's where you get that difference in focus. So that's the bench press. You've got a few things to look at there. Make sure you get in practice, play with it. I'm definitely an advocate for dumbbells. I think dumbbells are safer, allow more freedom of movement, so it's better on the shoulder joint, all that kind of stuff.
I don't give anyone barbell bench press.
No.
It's just a tool to show you guys different positions. With a dumbbell, we can go into that neutral grip. We can still get all that loading through the scapula, but we're not fixed in internal rotation. We can externally rotate while I'm working all that.
Okay, and then having a look at the deadlift, guys. One of your biomechanics exams, I'm pretty sure you still do it, is the stoop lift versus the deadlift. that's been in there for years. It's very important that you understand that idea of lever arms. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but if you increase the lever arm so the bar's further away from the lumbar spine, you're going to get an increase in load at the lumbar spine. Sorry about that, someone just walked in. So, you know, sometimes you're going to be especially with someone with maybe back pain, it might be more beneficial to have this side grip because then the lever's less on their lumbar. But we'll talk about that through the shoot, and you'll see it in the examples that we've done. Anything you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I definitely prefer that trap bar, hex bar style deadlift compared to a straight bar, just because of those degrees of freedom. You have a bit more space to kind of move around and align your body, and it can allow for these individual differences, whether it be a long torso, short femurs, long femurs, short tibia. Whereas with a conventional deadlift, you're limited to the bar against your shins.
Yeah.
You can't shift that center of mass any further back. As opposed to the trap bar, you can manipulate it how it needs to be manipulated.
And then always think, guys, when you've got that straight bar setup, it very much restricts like Graham was saying, was freedom of movement, but quite often it'll put you, so in a deadlift, you'll be in internal rotation under load at your shoulders.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything about that. So we can put it back into neutral in the trap bar deadlift. So I think it's a much safer lift.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest reasons we still do straight bar deadlifts is purely tradition. I don't see many reasons to use it in an athletic population if you have access to a trap bar.
Yeah, yeah. So moment arm, big one. Height, I quite often will lift it a little bit off the ground. That full, again, the only reason we lift at that level is, that's the rules of the deadlift technique, is that it's, the plates are at a certain height and the bars at a certain weight. But do we need to follow those rules with everyone? No. So I will generally use like blocks to lift it up, especially for myself. My deadlift is a much better deadlift when it's sort of at my tibial tuberosity. And you guys will see that. I get much less lumbar flexion, and there's no way I can manipulate that, and I'm quite flexible. So it improves that, and I still get all the posterior chain development, that I would get off the floor. So I'm developing my glutes, developing my hammies, my lats, all that stuff.
Agreed. I very rarely have people hinge or deadlift off the floor just because it's not needed, and don't get caught up in traditional movements and things having to be done, squatting to depth, deadlifting the floor. There are no brownie points for doing a deadlift off the floor as opposed to off the blocks.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, our job is to get results. And if your athlete does not need results at 90 degrees hip flexion with a loaded hamstring, picking something up off the ground, there's probably not much merit to doing that over just raising it up and protecting the spine.
Yeah, so everything, it sort of always comes back to that, what are you trying to achieve? So why have you programmed this exercise? So, I should be able to, if I see you training your client and I ask you, why have you chosen to do this lift off the ground versus off a little bit higher? You need to have an answer for that. And then, what was I going to say next? Sort of transfer into sport. What are we trying to achieve? Does it still get the development that we want? And there was something else I was going to say, but I sort of lost it. Sorry, guys. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it back up. Again, so there's some common technique errors that we're going to go through in the videos, and some of them I've just learned over time. I've never read them, so hopefully they help. And that's it for the theory side. And then we're going to move more into a couple of micro shoots now, because each unit sort of thing that we want to cover probably is only a 25-30 minute video. So we're going to probably do 2 of those a week from now on, give you guys some broad concepts to investigate further. Okay guys, same thing. This is now looking at the deadlift. And what I want, you've got 3 basic patterns. So we've done a push, a squat, and a hinge. They will apply to many of the exercises, the compensations you'll see regularly. And then, you guys will start learning there's similar compensations in like a pull pattern. So if you don't retract your scaps, your anterior translate. So very similar stuff. Once you have these 3 solidly and you understand how to change with different clients, you can transfer those skills over to pretty much every exercise. So get this ideas really well and strong, and you'll be good to train anything. So with the deadlifts, we start with just Graham doing a couple of good techniques. So you can see it's very much a hinge pattern. You guys should be all over this from EPP 1. And then the first one we try and show you is the rotation.
Nah, 2 knee dominant.
Oh yeah, the knee, the little roll pattern that you get. And both of us really struggle to show you this, but what you see is as they start to lift, the knees drive anteriorly into dorsiflexion, and then it sort of rolls up the whole body.
Yeah, it's because they lack that ability to hinge, and they're trying to shift their mass over the middle or kind of under the bar so they can stand up with it. So it becomes a lot more of a squat style pattern, and it just doesn't work with a bar restricted in its movement because of your shins.
So that was my good ones, and then this is me trying to show you, me trying to do that sort of knees go forward rolling pattern. Couple of ways you can coach that out. One of them I used to do was I would take the bar away and they'll do like an elevated kettlebell deadlift, and then I'll put my hand in front of their knee and I'll say don't touch it. That's all I have to do.
I would do an RDL, so start from the top down to the knee. So say we're doing a set of 8, I would get them to do 4 RDLs down to the knee, and then down to the knee, knees slightly go forward to touch the floor, deadlift up, and just breaking it into segments, doing it from the top down to learn that hinge, loading of the hamstring pattern.
Yeah, so again, lots of ways to skin a cat, and quite often you can't use one, you might have to use 3 or 4 different things to get it to work, to click. So here I think is when we're showing the rotation. So in this one we're showing you it via one leg extending first. Well, that was that leg's extending first, I think.
Yeah.
And then he's getting, quite often you'll see either the glutes rise first. So the knees are locking out and the hips drive high, and then quite often you'll see them flex their spine up.
Yeah, that's usually from the back lacking strength and the legs being a little bit more dominant. So it's usually a bracing thing where they're unable to keep those shoulders up. The legs will lock out, the butt will shoot up, and they lack that ability to kind of erect the trunk.
Yeah, and I always look very much at glutes for that as well.
Yeah,
So
glutes slow back.
they can't drive the glutes well, so they're not very good posterior chain, glutes, hip extension, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it could just simply be patterning as well.
Yeah, but you can see how that, knees extend, which creates a longer lever from the lumbar, and then quite often puts that flexion load on the lumbar as well. So you'll see it in guys when they're doing their absolute max lift, and they've probably developed a lot of thickness in the ligaments, thicker discs, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you definitely want to avoid it, especially when you're teaching someone early on.
Yeah, and this is definitely one of those scenarios where we don't have to straight away go down the rabbit hole of, let's strengthen the glute, let's look at what the lower back's doing. A cue as simple as, Dave, on your next lift, I want you to think about pushing away from the floor. I want you to think about leading with your shoulders. Something as simple as that could fix that fault.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, the glutes are weak, let's get rid of that. I'm going to get you to do, prone hand curls, all that kind of stuff.
And remember, the exercise itself is quite often corrective.
Yeah.
So the deadlift, especially the elevated one that we'll show you later, that quite often will fix posterior chain issues. So moving on, I think I'm going to do one more of these. Again, I pulled up sore today in the back from doing this, so I hope you appreciate it.
Rotation.
This is the rotation, guys. So remember, we're talking about one leg extending first, but it can be other things like one leg longer than the other. Different mobility in the hips. But yeah, it's something to look out for because you don't really want rotational loads from the lumbar with very heavy load. I've definitely exaggerated that because it took me a while to get my mind around how to do it.
They can be subtle. So this next one's probably the most common that I see. And that's trying to jerk the weight from the floor. People get really gassed up and wanting to pull a heavy deadlift. They brace their core and then put all of their force through the bar at once. And usually the weakest link in that system is the core. And you can see that I can get into a nice position and brace, put all my force in at once. And the first thing to go is that rounding of the spine.
So, watch you.
Nice and braced, push too hard. We lose that core patency.
And I sort of say when I'm trying to explain it to clients in simple terms, it's like there's sort of equal and opposite reactions. So we haven't taken the slack out of the bar. So when Graham pulls at it, he gets the opposite reaction to pull him down. And because he hasn't done a smooth lift, he gets that over exaggerated, pulls him back down, and that's why that back sort of gives up and flexes.
Yeah. The cue I will give is because usually our bumper plate is a little bit wider than our bar. So I'll cue people to kind of click the bar against the plate, and you'll feel that there's a bit of slack, it'll click. And I'll say, if I wanted you to think that if all your strength was on a knob from 1 to 10, I don't want you to go 10. I want you to slowly build up until you feel that bar and weight just slightly break the floor and then go. So we need to break that inertia off the floor and then go.
Yeah, I always cue take the slack out of the bar, but that click cue is probably better, I would say. Probably makes more sense to them because I used to have to sort of show them what I meant.
People that are new to the deadlift will, I think I see this fault maybe 90% of the time. That's because they think like, if I put all my force into it, I'm going to lift the weight, and almost always the first thing to fail is going to be the trunk, the abdomen, not the legs.
Yeah. So generally start slow, accelerate through. I didn't do this one because it looked didn't look nice on Graham's back.
I cringe watching it now.
So quick fix, guys. Again, we don't have to stick to the lifting rules. So most strength and conditioning coaches and teams who I've known, they've moved more to this elevated lift. It takes a lot of the risk out. We still get a lot of the reward. So you can see that's a really good lift there. Getting a heap of glute drive, all the posterior chain, back, lats, all that kind of stuff. I think my lift looks significantly better off of the blocks. I'm still getting all the benefit there and way less of the risk. So I like that heaps better for me.
For me personally, I think the next one is the trap bar. Yeah, it looks so much better. So I don't give anyone straight bar deadlifts anymore. I think if you have access to a trap bar, use a trap bar. With a straight bar on a deadlift, you have a very fixed plane of movement because obviously that bar can't go past your shins. It will just hit your shins. With a trap bar, you can manipulate its center of mass and where it aligns itself over your center of mass as much as you want, really.
The only thing we wanted to show you separately here is this trap bar actually starts really low to the ground. And even when you put plates on it, the way that is set up, it doesn't sit any higher. Graham's got good technique there, but it might be too low for some people. When he's set up at this height, it's a really good lift. You guys do a biomechanics exam question looking at this and why this is good, but it's mainly just leveraging the lumbar spine and the changes. And then Graham,
this is why I like the trap bar. So I can keep my tip ears very straight and hinge, or I can bring my knees forward and triple extend. Whereas that's something that I could not really do efficiently with the straight bar. So the trap bar allows us to manipulate the deadlift a lot more depending on the body type of the client.
So if you watch here, Graham will do hinge and then a squat pattern. So you don't really have a great option of doing that well with the straight bar. So you can change it to suit your client, and the grips reduce the lumbar load. So it's kind of win-win. You're still getting that development, less risk. These are the other options you've got. So if you've got somebody with really long femurs, and quite often if they've got a shorter torso, you can have a look at the sumo dead, so you can try it. So you can see with me, the sumo dead actually looks all right. Both of us worry about hitting our toes on this. I've seen people squish their toes. But that's a reasonably looking technique for me compared to the normal stance.
This isn't something that I'd use super often, but it is somewhere to go to. If you have someone with some strange body makeup or anthro, short torso, really long femurs, definitely something I'd investigate.
Yeah, I had someone last year who, in class, we had to go that way. Yeah. Really long legs, short torso. Great for running, not so great for lifting. Yeah. And then you can see here, what I've done is a squat stance. So the deadlift's usually, directly under your hips, toes pretty much facing forward. This is more of like the squat stance that we were talking about earlier. Hands inside, and you can see that's a really nice deadlift there as well. Keeps my back really straight. So that suits my body shape as well. Personally, I've moved to off the blocks for all my lifting. But as you can see, just by shifting my foot position, you can make a better technique.
I think this next one is that clean pull style of triple extension with a barbell. I can see he's really fixed in where he can put the bar because obviously it's going to hit his shins and it can be a little bit awkward with hitting the knee. I think he does hit his knee. Whereas with a trap bar, we can manipulate that however we need to.
Yeah, so you can see if you're coaching a weightlifter, which I wouldn't suggest unless you've done all that weightlifting coaching training. See, I grabbed my knee there, so I clipped my knee. They're going to be in this more upright position. So it becomes more like a squat pattern because they need to be more upright for the bar path. So again, there's no right or wrong because this sport needs this, but if we're trying to develop posterior chain, we want to look like this hinge pattern. So again, things change for different goals.
If I wanted to train triple extension with a weight from the bottom, I'd just go to a trap bar.
Yeah, this is a really good position in the trap bar if you're trying to do something plyometric, like we're talking about.
Loaded jumping.
Yeah, loaded jumping in that position. That's a great setup in the trap bar because you wouldn't want to be set up in this hinge type look like that if we're going to teach triple extension and jumping. So again, guys, be wary of this one size fits all. You have to do it like this type training. You have to follow the rules of these sports because you guys will very rarely probably be training powerlifters and weightlifters. So you don't have to stick to any rules. Make it suit your field-based sport, clinical patient, all that kind of stuff. Look at risk reward, look at their body shape, and you guys will understand that more after Biomech 1 and Biomech 2 and when you finish funking out. Anything else worth throwing?
That's it.
Cool. Thanks, guys.